Horror over the years teaches us to fear the unknown. But what if the villain isn't the monster, but rather a mirror? It is your boy Tech. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you're new, smash that like button, and come ride with me as we go over whether some of our favorite horror villains were actually vindicated in some of their motivations. Villains are supposed to terrify us, but the scariest ones, well, they really just might have a point. So in this video, Spooky Gang, I kind of wanted to take more of a quote-unquote devil's advocate point of view, because we all have our favorite horror villains and, you know, they go on multiple killing sprees throughout some of their franchises and so on and so forth. And I know that in some cases, depending on the villain, there's some level of sympathizing with the antagonist or the villain, and there's some level of that moral ambiguity. And with that said, let's take a look at some of these horror villains and see if there's any validity to their motivation and their morals. And we'll be starting this off with Jigsaw from the Saw franchise. In most people's eyes, Jigsaw is pretty much a sadist, but is there the chance that he's a moral absolutist? In the Saw franchise, John Kramer is diagnosed with cancer, and he becomes infatuated with the idea that people really sit there and waste their lives. So from his perspective, he creates tests that helps people find redemption. For example, Amanda's survival in the Saw franchise, she becomes more of a believer, which proves that his methods work in his eyes. So it brings up a moral dilemma. Is it murder if a victim can choose whether they survive or not? Because, you know, for the most part and throughout the series, he typically targets, you know, drug addicts, cheaters, corrupt people, you know, people that most people view in a more negative light in terms of society and their quote-unquote contributions to it. So this really could create some level of a complicated angle and perspective of things. And, you know, as we see later on in the franchise, Jigsaw never personally kills anybody, honestly. His disciples start twisting things in his original philosophy of it all. And then it raises the question whether he lost complete control or whether he was a hypocrite the entire time. Another movie that raises such great questions is the movie Us, directed by Jordan Peele. So when you generalize the movie and everything about the tethered, think of they were created, they were abandoned, they were oppressed. Are they really wrong to fight back? So just for a little bit of a background, the tethered are government-made doppelgangers who live underground while their counterparts get to live on the surface with pretty much normal lives. This movie in a lot of cases is truly a social commentary on oppression that a lot of people experience today or have experienced over many years, and that level of socioeconomic inequality. So from their perspective, you could argue that the tethered are really just fighting for a life that they were unfairly denied. So one could really look at this movie as the horror of the film doesn't necessarily lie with the actions of the tethered, but more so in the recognition of the complicity in systems that create others. Similarly, when you look at a movie like The Invisible Man from 2020, like in this movie, the horror isn't just Adrian, who Cecilia is trying to escape from, it's more so about the system that enables him. In the beginning of the movie, Cecilia is gaslit by her abusive ex, Adrian, fakes his death, and then uses an invisible suit to pretty much torment her throughout the rest of the movie, which really, in the eyes of many others, makes her seem paranoid. So one angle that you can look at this movie with is not necessarily that what Adrian is doing himself is right, but more so that the villain is more so the systemic disbelief in women's trauma. Perfect scene that really shows that is the restaurant scene where Cecilia is sitting there with her sister and her sister gets killed by Adrian, but because he's invisible, everybody sitting around her doesn't believe her, and she's just sitting there like, yo, like in complete disbelief of what's happening, and the people around her are in disbelief that anybody other than her actually did that. In a lot of cases, this mirrors real life where a lot of women victims are discredited by some of their experiences. And if you want to, you can even flip this on its head as well and say that sometimes the villain isn't invisible because of technology, like Adrian is in this case, but more so because of the fact that society refuses to see those villains and those monsters. When you dive into a movie like Carrie, for instance, whether you're watching the original or the remake, is there the chance that Carrie isn't a monster and is more so a consequence? Think about it like this. She's a shy, sheltered girl with telekinetic powers who is relentlessly bullied when she's at school, and she's abused by her frantic mother. So when you highlight a scene, for instance, like the prom night scene, where she was finally getting some level of kindness from somebody, and that's when she gets embarrassed by the blood prank, and she releases her power in a deadly outburst. So is Carrie more of a tragic figure rather than a villain? Her story is about the consequence of cruelty, potentially religious extremism, and of course a level of neglect as well. And then when you take into account the viewer and the audience's emotions, when we're watching this movie, I'm pretty sure 99% of us are all rooting for Carrie as she destroys pretty much everybody who has ever gotten in her way. Some people didn't necessarily deserve it, but pretty much anybody who bullied her or did her wrong, we honestly were rooting her on to do them dirty, because in a lot of cases we could see the pain in her and ourselves. And it really overall just symbolizes how society can create monsters through oppression and bullying and just that overall neglect as well. When you look further into alien invasion films, is it more so about the aliens or is it more so about the survivors? Movies like The Mist, 10 Cloverfield Lane, A Quiet Place. Sometimes the real horror isn't the creatures, but more so how humans react to the crisis. Like for instance in The Mist, like the final scene where David shoots his group to spare them from the monsters, only for the military to arrive seconds later. So when you look at it, the true horror is really that hopelessness and that despair which led to the bad decision making. In a lot of cases, fear makes dangerous leaders. In 10 Cloverfield Lane, John Goodman's character is paranoid, controlling, and abusive, but he was right about the alien invasion. So in this case, you have a survivalist who looks like a lunatic, but he's actually vindicated. And it kind of raises questions about how we label people as dangerous just because they don't conform. As far as A Quiet Place, what if humanity deserves extinction? I mean, how do you create a world where silence becomes your only safety? Spooky Gang, there's just so many different ways and perspectives that you can look at some of these movies, and it really raises thought-provoking questions where you're just like, that's a really interesting point of view. And that is exactly why I love horror movies as much as I do. Yeah, of course I love my, very simple, very straightforward, campy slasher horror, and, we'll let that be what it is. But also, I love the fact that horror movies truly do have many layers to them, and there's so many different aspects and elements that make these movies great and allow you to have deeper thought other than the fact that you just happen to enjoy whatever you were watching on screen. So that's what makes horror movies great, and they always make great discussion for videos like this. But Spooky Gang, that is all I have. Y'all let me know what y'all think of some of these perspectives and if there happens to be any validity to them. I mean, maybe horror villains don't scare us because they're evil, but because they challenge our sense of morality. I mean, heck, next thing you know, we could probably look at Michael Myers as the force of nature, and whether he was vindicated, or Freddy as this vengeful spirit gone wrong. You just never know. But yeah, y'all comment down below what y'all thought of some of these. As always, Spooky Gang, I appreciate y'all. Love y'all. Gonna keep dropping these bangers as always, so y'all already know how we rockin'. Until next time, Spooky Gang, y'all stay blessed and y'all stay spooky.